Okay, let's see if we're up and running. I think we are. All right. So we did from the end of World War II to the present. We went backwards. So we're going to go from World War II back to World War One today. So just kind of, and it'll be the same assignment. You pick a couple of topics, any two of them, write me a paragraph kind of summarizing what happened, why they're important. Your call, but just kind of a review of everything we've done. All right, so World War II, the causes are going to be the Depression. The Great Depression led to the rise of these dictators, right? Most notably Hitler and Mussolini. Hitler comes to pay, Germany's having a depression at the same time the United States having a depression. And Hitler gets them out pretty quick because he's putting everybody to work either as a soldier or as, working on weapons, making weapons. And Mussolini's doing a similar thing in Italy. All right, so like Hitler was warlike. These Axis powers were warlike, and nobody wanted to stand up to him. Remember, the story was nobody wanted to stand up to a bully. Hitler being the bully. So the United States believed in isolationism, so we just kind of want to stay on our part of the world. Britain and France, when Hitler's taken over more and more countries, they kind of give in to him. They, call this meeting at Munich, and they let him have this part of Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland that he wanted. And then, of course, he keeps right on going. So nobody would stood up to the bully to prevent the start of war. And then once it gets going, it's kind of the opposite of World War One. The offense always wins the battles in World War II. The tanks and planes and aircraft carriers and the atomic bomb, whoever's attacking tends to be winning. The Blitzkrieg was the lightning war that Hitler used when he was attacking, especially Poland. He got slowed down when he attacked Britain and the Soviet Union. Winston Churchill was the heroic leader of Great Britain in the Battle of Britain, and he kind of got stopped by the Soviet winter when he invaded the Soviet Union. As he takes over countries, he's got the Holocaust going, and he captures Jewish people, and he sends them to the concentration camps that we're really familiar with. All right. Well, the United States doesn't get involved until 1941, and it wasn't Hitler that attacked us. It was Japan. We put an embargo on Japan because they had been expanding. They had invaded Indochina, which would go on to become Vietnam. So Pearl Harbor was December 7th, 1941. Remember, they attacked us on Sunday morning. All the soldiers were either, at church or they were sleeping in because they'd been having a big time the night before. The Japanese didn't, they didn't like to surrender. So MacArthur uses the island hopping strategy against the Japanese. Doesn't take all the islands, just some of them. Against the Germans, in order to take Europe back from Hitler, D-Day was necessary. That was June 6, 1944, where our soldiers to the beaches of Normandy, lots of high casualty rates on those days. The war at home was also really important. Rose of the River is kind of the symbol of married women factory workers making the weapons and the war machine. The WV was African Americans fighting against racism. The Nazis abroad and also fighting against racism here in the United States. And the sad story in the United States during the war was the Japanese internment camps. Okay, the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Thinking was Japan wouldn't surrender and we'd have to have a D-Day in Japan. And 500,000 soldiers get killed or 1 million soldiers. So drop the atomic bomb mainly probably to save American lives from an invasion of Japan. All right, so that's World War II. You back it up. The Great Depression. All right, the Great Depression is going to, starting with the stock market crash. That was October 29th, 1929. Two causes of the stock market crash was speculation and margin buying. Speculation is a short-term investment. Buy low, try to sell high, make a big profit. Margin buying is when people borrowed money in order to speculate. Speculation throughout our history has caused a lot of bad economies. In the 1800s, they were called panics. In the 20th century, they're called recessions or depressions. The cause of the depression itself was TIC. It's an acronym, TICC. The tariff really shut down world trade. Inequality, the folks at the bottom of the pyramid couldn't afford to buy what the factories were making, so then the factories shut down and laid people off. The crash itself was a cause of the depression. Got a lot of banks shutting down and bank runs going on. And then the credit buying of the 20s, people couldn't afford to pay banks back that loaned them money for consumer goods. Remember we read that book, that article, what the Depression did to people. So people living in Hoovervilles, they've lost their homes. Hoovervilles, these little shacks made out of wood and cardboard. Suicide rate went up. Men kind of lost their identity. Women kind of keeping the family together. Remember Ghost of, Grapes of Wrath. Ma Joe's kind of keeping the family together. Guys are hopping trains. The starvation was taking place. So Hoover gets blamed for the Depression. Franklin Roosevelt becomes president. He has 3 R's of the New Deal. Relief. FERA is an example of that. That's just ease people's suffering. So that was direct aid to people, money and food to people. Recovery programs designed to put people back to work. So any of those programs got a W in it. Stands for work. If people have jobs, that end the Depression. The CCC was Roosevelt's favorite, remember? So that's Civilian Conservation Corps. And that was young men, taking young men out of the cities and putting them out in the countryside to do conservation work. And, all the pictures of the young men, they always got their shirts off and they feel tough doing all that work. Keeps them out of trouble, makes them some money, gets them out of the city. All right, and then the reform program, Social Security, since the Great Depression, since the New Deal, so seniors have done much better financially. The Securities and Exchange Commission, designed to prevent another stock market crash. FDIC ensures our bank deposits up to $2,500, I believe now. And the TVA provides cheap hydroelectric power and jobs in the Tennessee Valley. All right, so there's the Great Depression. Moving back, the 20s, the Jazz Age. All right, so you got some economic stuff. People trying to keep up with each other, buying a lot of stuff, so they're buying on credit for the first time in history. Advertising, shouldn't have said advertising. But companies advertise because people kind of had what they needed. So person advertising is persuade somebody to buy something that they don't need. People were going to the movies in the 20s. Charlie Chaplin was the great silent film star. His character was called the Tramp. We saw him get stuck in the factory in the machine in class. The radio kind of brought families together, kind of a chief source of entertainment in the 20s. The Model T Ford was the first affordable car. It's kind of controversial because, kids can go on dates away from dad. You can't really keep an eye on them. The flappers, the kind of symbol of rebellion. These young ladies with short skirts, short hair. In the 20s, jazz is the music of the 20s. Louis Armstrong, most famous jazz trumpet player. Jazz was brought north during the Great Migration when African Americans were moving from the south to the north. The Harlem Renaissance is this explosion of black achievement and cultural activity. In the 20s, Langston Hughes, I Too Sing America, the most famous, one of those most famous poet from the Harlem Renaissance. The Lost Generation were rioters who felt like they had lost everything they believed in, kind of World War I. Great Gatsby, Scott Fitzgerald's kind of Exhibit A for that. Remember Gatsby, doesn't matter what he does, he's never good enough for Daisy. So, Fitzgerald's arguing that in the 20s, the American dream is a lie for certain people, if you're born on the wrong side of the tracks, so to speak. All right, you had our first sports hero, Babe Ruth, that made more money than the President of the United States did. Hit 714 home runs during his career. Great home run hitter for the New York Yankees. Cultural heroes, Charles Lindbergh flew his plane on first transatlantic flight, flew from New York to Paris and back. And there were forces in American society that didn't like all the change. So the Klan didn't like the new immigrants. The Scopes trial was when a guy got put on trial for teaching evolution, and Prohibition is trying to, cut down on the drinking. And you had that in rural areas even before the 18th Amendment was passed. All right. So then we back up one more time to World War I. So the cause of World War I are the isms. Remember, nationalism, that's love of your country. Imperialism, they think empire is a real good thing. Militarism, that's kind of the glorification of armed strength. And then the two alliances. Remember, it's the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente. The Triple Entente was France, Britain, and Germany. The Triple Alliance was, France, Britain, and Russia. Triple Alliance was Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. The Triple Alliance became the Central Powers during the war, and the Triple Entente became the Allies. War officially got started when Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was assassinated. It's really brutal warfare, trench warfare, fought with machine guns, and so the defense kind of always wins. Gas was invented, mustard gas was invented to kind of overcome the machine gun, but generally speaking, it's a war of attrition. Whichever country can send more soldiers to die and hold out for the longest is going to win. So Woodrow Wilson wanted to keep the United States out of it. And we didn't enter it until 1917, but three things got us involved. The sinking of the Lusitania by the Germans had 128 Americans on board. The Zimmerman telegram from Germany to Mexico, trying to get Mexico to attack the United States. And finally, German submarines were just sinking American ships right and left. During the war, Wilson uses propaganda to get everybody to support the war effort. There's a draft during the war. Congress passes Espionage and Sedition Acts. It's a crime not to support the war. It's a crime to dodge the draft. Eugene Debs got thrown in jail. Doughboys were the soldiers. I misspelled it there. The soldiers, American soldiers, went over there, weren't as starving looking, sunken in cheeks as the British and French and German soldiers. So even though they probably only weighed about 130, 140 pounds, they looked fleshier than the other soldiers. Wilson got to make it an idealistic war because of the war to end all wars. And remember, the Treaty of Versailles ended the war, but it was a big failure. Blamed Germany for everything. They lost money and guns and land, and they had to say that the war was their fault. And then Wilson comes home and he can't persuade Congress to ratify the treaty, the Senate to ratify the treaty. So we don't join the League of Nations, so we're not part of this thing that Wilson comes up with to try to prevent the next big war. And because the treaty fails, World War II kind of comes along. That's the cause of World War II. Okay, so there's those.